Alright guys, how you doing? It's Rabea. I hope you're all well. So following in suit with Neural DSP's birthday sale, they've got 50% off all the plugins bar the Massaad plugin. I just want to say happy birthday to Neural, and if any of you guys have picked up my plugin, my Archetype plugin, or you're thinking about it, first of all, thank you very much. Really appreciate that. And secondly, this video is basically about some tips and ideas and approaches to how to use the plugin. Obviously, use it however you want, but I just figured that if there was anybody who was a little bit confused about some of the, amps or pedals or anything like that, that I could shed a little bit of light on it, how to use it, the thought process behind the choices that we made, and just figured that that would be kind of useful for you guys, especially if this is one of your first Archetype plugins or one of your first times using guitar software. So hopefully it's helpful to you guys. My guitar is going straight into the Apollo X4 interface. So let's crack on. Okay, so you should be able to see the screen grab up now. This is the default preset, so when you load it up, it looks like this. I haven't changed anything. I've just flipped through a couple of the different amps. But for you guys that aren't aware, the first amp is based on, basically, it's a Fender Twin with a couple of mods. The second amp is the first gain channel of my Kraken, my VX Kraken from Victory Amps. It's the first prototype that we did, that we signed off, so I thought that was really cool to include that in the plugin. And then the third amp, the high gain amp, is essentially the second gain channel of that same amplifier. But we modeled both the EL34 version and the 6L6 version for you to flick between, because I use those both live in stereo, and I always thought that was really cool. So we wanted to include that. But we did add some mods to it as well. As you can see in the first gain, the Crunch amp, we added these mid boost and high end boost. And then on the high gain amp, we added a tight knob and a presence knob. And of course you can flick between two tubes, which you couldn't really do. And one thing that's worth saying about this tight knob, I'll get into in a minute, but it's really, really cool how it works. But anyway, when you load it up, this is how it sounds. I'll give you a neck pickup, middle position even. So I didn't want to, I created this default preset, and one thing that's worth pointing out is that everything's been preset so you can sort of plug and play, including the EQ. I've already got that set up, so. If you want that. The reverb and delays are set up how I like them. I'm using the 57 and a ribbon, which I always use when I'm using Neural plugins, which is how I like it. All the pedals are preset, but they're not on. And also, I didn't think it would be wise to turn these on the Crunch amp. I thought, let you try it out for yourself so you can hear the difference. So this is the high boost. And then here comes the mid boost. So they're the first thing in terms of the input of the amplifier. They're first, and then you get the rest of the controls, as you can see, left to right. They're kind of inspired by the 29 pedals Una. If you've ever tried that pedal, it's basically an active EQ in a pedal. And I liked that. I thought it was cool how it adds nice bit of brightness and mid-range to the amp sound. I'll also point out that it is raining, so in case you're hearing weird noises, that's the rain hitting my studio window. Anyway, something else I wanted to point out regarding these amps is the depth control. Now, on the VX Kraken, it's a switch on the back, but we thought it would be cool to add a control on the front and actually exceed both how much you can pull out and how much you can add in. So at 12 o'clock, that is basically the bass focus pulled out on the back of the amp. And when you pull it all the way down here on the front, that's as if you've pressed it in, but further. So it's about halfway would be where you press it in on the real amp. And then obviously we added way more depth as well, just depending on what kind of tone you're after. So. The reason that we did that is because I use Strats almost as much now as I use high gain, like modern guitars, and I wanted to be able to get as much low end as I wanted for playing with a Strat or a Tele out of the plugin. So it's really important for me to have that amount of low end possibility. Much after hearing the Tone King, I was like, yeah, this thing's got a ton of low end and it really feels realistic. So I wanted to, incorporate some of that into my plugin. It's worth saying that on the Clean and the Crunch cabs, you've got a choice of 2 different speakers and all the mics. And we auditioned these cabs. These were all shot specifically for this plugin, so that you have the Fender Twin cab, and then we added a different speaker as well, which is a nice blend. On this one, GB stands for greenback and BB stands for blackback. 2 different types of speaker, but I love the blend of both of them. And then we only wanted to include the one V30 loaded cab for the high gain amp, because really high gain V30s, what's not to like? So we auditioned a bunch. In fact, Nolly sent a load of his V30s over to Finland for them to shoot the IRs for this plugin. And it's also worth pointing out that the room mic that you have here is what you're hearing is the cab in the room. It's not just like a room IR. We actually shot specifically each cab in the room. Something else that's worth pointing out is that the transpose knob and the doubler, although they were first introduced on John Petrucci's plugin, they're not specific to his plugin. They're actually new features across any future plugins with Neural DSP. Because I saw a couple of people were like, oh, I've just taken that from the John Petrucci plugin, which I guess you could say I have, but equally they're now standard features on all future plugins from Neural. So we wanted to include those because it's super useful having those 2 on there. I could sit here for hours. I've already done a deep dive of the plugin, but what I wanted to do is just give you some quick tips and tricks about how the plugin works. For example, in the pedal section, you may have noticed we've got vintage and modern switches on the Paragon, the Colossus, and the Chaos Bed. Now, between those 2 switches, you're actually loading up a whole new pedal. It's not just like a slight change in the EQ or anything. It's a whole new pedal. So for example, the Colossus fuzz, we modeled my favorite fuzz for like modern riffs, like the Thunderclaw by Mr. Black, which I really love that pedal. So we modeled that. And then in the vintage mode, we modeled the JHS Bender fuzz, which is like a tone bender fuzz. And they've done such a stunning job. They sound awesome. To give you an example of how it sounds, particularly in a more modern setting, let me just give you a quick example. This is how I'd dial it in. I'd gain it about halfway. I'd probably drop the master a bit and then boost the level. Brighten that up a little bit more using the EQ. I want to back off a little bit of that, get rid of the reverb for a second. And then if I was to go over to the vintage, it'd be really chaotic. And the throw on the Chaos Bed. It's also worth pointing out with the Chaos Bed that's really fun is that obviously in modern mode, it's like the POG that I always use. It's got an octave up and an octave down and a direct level. But in vintage, we added an Octavio, essentially, Octavia, whatever it's called. Basically that it's derived from a ring mod, which is kind of weird, but that's what it is. So anyway, this is what it sounds like without it. Now, if I throw on the vintage, well, the Octavia, it adds a totally different dimension to it. So super fun. Super fun. The Paragon Overdrive in modern mode, you've got the classic Tube Screamer, and in vintage mode, I think it was an EP boost we used. Again, in vintage mode, if you're using a Strat, like I like to use, as I keep going on about Strats and Tellies and stuff, I wanted to be able to cater for both. That's why, as well, with the clean amp, I wanted like a classic, clean amp, like a Fender Twin. So even though it works really nicely on these kind of sounds, it's a nice clean tone. And then all I have to do to make that sound a bit sweeter is turn on the twin blade dual compressor. So you get the idea. One thing I want to point out here with the twin blade compressor is some people were a little bit confused. I saw in comments about like how to use it. Think about it like it's based on my Cali Stacked Edition Origin Effects pedal. And the idea here is that you've actually got control of two independent compressors that run into each other if you want. So if you just want to use one, this through knob here, just pull it all the way over to the left, and then you've got control of the attack and release on compressor 1. And then you can just use it as traditional compressor. Whereas you start turning it up, it feeds one into the other, and that's where you get some really wild compression. I just really enjoy how much scope for compression there was with that pedal in real life, and I wanted to incorporate that into the plugin. In gives you more of the compression sound, and out is going to send it through to the amplifier, so you can actually drive the amp with this. If you want more intense compression sound, turn it up. You get the idea. Because again, the clean is very basic, like a Fender Twin is, but then we've got the same sort of mid boost and treble boost in front, which I think works really well on humbuckers. And I was kind of assuming that most of you guys would be using humbuckers when you buy this plugin. That's why I've had them switched on the default preset. Anyway, the amp that I really want to get into is the high gain amp, because first thing I'll say is, if you're looking for like high gain metal chugging like Gojira levels, you're not going to get that out of this plugin. It's a high gain amplifier, and obviously the Kraken is a high gain amplifier, but this is the lead amplifier of this plugin, specifically named lead, because for me, this is what I would use for my lead tones. If you're into like heavy metal and djenty stuff, then I would recommend getting something like the Gojira plugin, or I don't know, the Granifier or the Nolly plugin or whatever. For me, I like the heavy tones I can get out of this, but I use a lot less gain in my high gain amps than a lot of metal players do, because I prefer more of a raw, aggressive kind of sound. So that's my quick sort of caveat to using this amplifier. But I saw a lot of people talking about like the noise that you get out of this amplifier. One thing that's worth pointing out is it is a 50-watt head. And if you've ever played the real Kraken, it's not the quietest amp, but it's got fairly low noise floor. And it's similar with this. I mean, it's also worth pointing out that the master is at halfway. Now, if you want to get more scope out of your EQ and presence, you would turn the master down. But I figured that we'd leave it here for now. That's the kind of heavy tone that I would always go for. It's not the most intense with gain. For me, that's the kind of heavy sound that I love. Nice and raw and aggressive. Let me talk a little bit about this amplifier. So the first thing is, once again, we've got the depth knob that exceeds both the amount of boosting and cutting you can do with the low end. You may have noticed this EL34 switch and 6L6 switch. So for most people, they associate like heavy high gain tones with 6L6. So that's why it's set to that. One thing I would say is if you switch over to the EL34 with the master that high, it might sound a bit odd. becomes a bit thicker. It's worth pointing out that all the neural models are genuine, like full-scale models of the real amplifier, so they react in more or less the exact same way. That's why you can get all those kind of harmonic overtones out of the neural plugins, and the feel is really good because of the way they model their amps. It's completely different to other companies that do it. I've been there, I've seen it, I know how it works. Not to just sort of cancel anyone else out, but I've seen how they do their devices for QC and for plugins, and it's insane how accurate it actually is to the real amp. So that in mind, using EL34, you might want to back off that master a bit. Now you've got more scope with the presence knob. That sounds really, really good. It's a tweaking plugin. It's worth pointing that out, that all these amps, I love to tweak settings all the time and get different tones out, and I want the most scope out of tonal possibilities with my amps and gear that I use in real life, and that's exactly what I wanted to do with this. I wanted to give you an opportunity to become a tweaker. If you're not really into that, then it's fair enough. You know, I saw a couple of videos, people saying like, it takes a little while to dial in a good high gain tone, but you know, if you nudge the settings, it can, you know, all fall out. And I understand that might be the case, but for me, I love the fact that I can tweak it this much. So anyway, let's carry on. So that's the sound that I really like. Let's back that off a little bit. So this tight knob is where it's at. With regards to high gain amplifiers, they have filters in the preamp section that are dialed in such a way you can't actually affect that on a real analog amplifier. It's sort of dialed in and preset inside the circuit of the amp, right? So on the Kraken, we looked and saw that it was around 900 hertz, where the filter is essentially, it's how much low end it's going to let in, or whatever you want to call it, and that's what gives it its tightness, right? So if I put this at 12 o'clock, this is exactly what the stock Kraken is like. Imagine that's 900 hertz and it's on a filter that moves up and down the spectrum, right? I was like, can we not mess with that? Can we not put it on a dial? Because I think that's really cool. And the reason is that if you want extra tightness, you're moving the filter up the scale, up the frequency spectrum. Or even higher. So you can do all the hammer-ons and pull-offs and stuff, because although there's a gate that's always preset on this, I don't really like to use gates generally, so I figured that the tight knob would be really cool. But the best bit for me is if you want to fundamentally change the feel of this amplifier, you go the other way. So you're pulling that filter down, letting in more low end, and what it does is it changes the response and the feel of the amp. It gets you more into that sort of flubby kind of messer feeling. We go back to 12 o'clock. All the way out again. It actually feels different. It's great for lead if you put it on lower. And some of you might be like, okay, yeah, but now it's gotten really like low-endy and flubby. But this is the fun bit. Using the depth knob, we can pull that out. It's tightened it up a little bit, but the best bit, and the bit that I find really useful, and this is why we added the bass control to the Paragon, is pulling that bass out on the Paragon. So let me show you. Now it's tightened it up, but it's a different feeling amp because we've moved the filter all the way down using the tight knob. I think that's awesome. Let's put the bass at 12 o'clock. Let's drop the mid a bit, boost the treble. In fact, I'm going to lower the master. I'm going to boost the presence. So that's awesome. And again, basically, I hope that gets the point across. How cool that tight knob is and how beneficial it is to the overall scope, like moldability of this particular amplifier. I wish you could do that in real life, and I'm not sure you can because of where the filter is placed in the preamp section of a real analog amplifier. But as far as I understand it, it's something that hasn't been achieved yet in high gain amplifiers in the real world. So I really love that. And also, remember, using the bass control on the Paragon Overdrive is super handy, because if you do pull the tight knob all the way down and you want it to be tighter, use the Paragon, pull the bass out of that. But also, having the tight knob all the way down, you can get like really cool, flubby, fuzzy, doomy kind of tones. Especially if we boost the depth as well. And then we throw on the fuzz as well. Oh, it's fierce. Vintage mode. Let's take off the overdrive. So, yeah, you get the idea. You can dial in so many different tones with this plugin, between Strat playing, tele playing, and then modern high gain guitars and high gain amps and tones and stuff. The plugin had to be able to do all of that in the realm of guitar tone. And then obviously the synth was the beautiful bonus on top. I really wanted to shed a little bit more light on the high gain amp because, let's be fair, most of you guys really enjoying this plugin, and I love that. But, you can't help but pick out some of the, comments and opinions of the high gain section of this plugin. And I just wanted to shed some light on it and give you a little bit more idea about the direction, the approach to this high gain amp and why it is the way it is. It's also worth saying that there's so many neural plugins with high gain amplifiers. So, go and get one of those if you're looking just for high gain, djenty, metal stuff. For me, it wasn't the first priority with this plugin. I obviously like to use high gain, but it was not the first priority when designing the plugin. And I'll reiterate it again. Using the master lower and boosting the level, you'll get way more out of your EQ section with any amplifier, not just this one. Bring the master down if you want to use more of the EQ section. The final piece of the puzzle, the synth. basically what it is a subtractive mono synth, exactly the same as something like a Moog. My subsequent 37 is exactly the same. It uses a Moog ladder filter inside the Overlord synth, so it's going to sound very similar to a Moog synth because I love the sound of them. This particular element of the plugin was inspired by my Keeley Synth 1 pedal, but the fundamental difference is that the Synth 1 is an effect on top of your guitar, whereas this, the technology inside it essentially is, imagine a tuner that detects the pitch of your guitar super quickly, like mega quickly. It's actually been improved on the latest update as well. But imagine a guitar tuner, it detects the pitch of your guitar or your bass or any pitched instrument worth pointing out. Then it sends that to, it basically triggers the ADSR of the synth and the oscillators, and you get genuine synthesis, like genuine synthesizer. It isn't a guitar effect, it's a synthesizer. So that's the beauty of this plugin. Quick little bit about it, really fast. Obviously you've got your wave shapes up here that change the sound of your synth. As you can hear those glitches and pops and stuff, that's because the pitch detection's picking up as much as it can, so when I slide around, it's fun, but you know, if you don't want that, bring the input sensitivity down so it won't be quite as intense. The cool thing is it allows you to play pretty much exactly how you normally play. I would say that when you're tracking, you can be a little bit more careful if you don't want the glitches and pops. And I also find that it does work better, or at least it's a little bit cleaner with less output pickup. So if you use something like a single coil or a coil split on your guitar, it'll actually give you less of that glitches and pops. And that's something that I've worked out over the course of having this plugin now since it came out last August. Back to the sound we had originally. Okay, so in the middle you've got your unisons, the width of them. Unisons here. Obviously with one, the width won't do anything. Two. I love it with 5. I think it's super powerful and wide sounding. The amplifier here, the amount of sustain, the attack and decay. So that's really, really useful. And again, the other way. The arpeggiator, which is absolutely wild. You can have it on just up. There's loads of different ways you can use it. Obviously, because of pitch detection, you've got choice of your root note and your mode, major and minor, so you can get all sorts of different arpeggios out of this. It's absolutely wild. One of the things I really love doing is just keeping it on like a 0 octave, no notes in the arpeggio. And as we bring down the attack decay knob, another little tip here is the envelope retrigger. Now, basically what that does is every time, with it turned on, it triggers in you, the ADSR triggers again and the oscillators trigger again with it turned on. So every time. Which is fun. If you turn it off, it allows you to be a little bit more legato-y. It's still, if you dig in, it's going to detect a new one. But when you're doing legato and stuff, it's not going to trigger one every time. The filter, like your classic synths all have this. We've got drive, which is one of the last things we added. I love this. Very handy. And then your envelope amount, so when you dig in, stuff like this. If I put these back to original. I've also got a gate, as I said, the input sensitivity, the mix, that's the mix of the synth in. So one of my favorite features is the pre and the post knob, because the pre and the post knob means one of the things we did on the Tosca album a lot was that's when I got my subsequent 37. And one of the things we did was we ran it through my Krakens, and we got loads of cool synth tones out of that for that record. And ever since then, I've used it in the same way across tons of recordings. So why not bring it to the plugin? So the pre and the post switch. And again, it's now running through the entire signal chain, so I've got control of all these. I can use the compressor, I can use the fuzz. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And, you know, if you like the sound of it, you might want to make it more intense, turn off the cab. And again, it might be a bit intense for you, so you've got the cutoff. Or if you don't want to use the cutoff, you've got the filter, you've got the EQ, so you can find the frequency you don't like. One of the other cool features that I really love is the detune. So obviously in post, it sounds like this. Without it on, it sounds like this. Adds a little bit of a flange effect, a bit more dimension, and the more you turn it up, the more intense it gets. But what's really cool is if you put this through the amplifier, it actually starts to sound like a wild organ. So I made a preset that essentially does what I'm describing. That was in the song Nomads, which I released recently. It's one of the last singles I brought out with Ben. And I'll be doing a mix breakdown of that song, and I'll share the preset with you when I get there, because it's really fun and it sounds really cool. It sounds like this crazy wild organ. But that's the cool thing. Like, I dialed it in, used it, and now it would take me a little while to find that exact sound and dial it in. But I love that because I get to, you know, you're just tweaking away, trying to find what works for you. And fortunate enough, it's been reviewed in some tech magazines, some really high-profile tech magazines, and they're pretty certain that this kind of tech is a bit of a world first with regards to the whole pitch detection of the instrument and then triggering actual oscillators. Like, it's wild stuff. And when I went there, as you've seen in the documentary of the making of this plugin, getting to see them talking about it and seeing entire walls of code and like algebraic, like, I don't even know what kind of mathematics it was or physics or what, but it's just like numbers, letters, brackets, symbols, all this crazy stuff. And I'm like, what's that wall doing? And they're like, oh, that's just the filter cut off. So that one wall, these guys are insane. And they've made this for me, which is absolutely incredible. But in any case, that's the synth. Last thing I want to show you is, if we go back to this sound. Maybe you didn't notice this, but on the delay section and the reverb section, firstly, you've got a freeze for your reverb, which I love because it allows you to do modal practice. That's sick. And again, you can change the pitch. Which, if you use an expression pedal and hook it up, you know, like I've shown you on other videos, the EV1 with Boss is really good. You can map it to that. You can map anything from this plugin to that. So I might do a video further down the line where I'm using my expression pedal to control a bunch of synth stuff, create some wild sounds that way. One thing I wanted to point out, which you may not have noticed, is there is also a pre and a post switch on the delay, because I wanted to be able to hear the sound of a delay in front of the amplifier as much as in the loop of an amplifier. Because I saw there's, like, on nollies you've got a delay in the pedal section, you've also got a delay in the other section, and there was a limited amount of space to put pedals. So I was like, well, can we not just put a pre and a post switch on the delay, and it kind of takes up less space? You don't need a delay pedal in the pedal section of the plugin. So I usually put it in single mode, so it's like a single delay. So it acts completely differently than in post. You get classic effects loop tones, but in front, let me give it a little bit of this. You can do all the shoegazery stuff, like. I'll show you a really quick example of that as well. I did it with an ambient hole. This is fun. That pretty much covers tips and tricks for this plugin. The part that I really wanted to point out was in the high gain amplifier, that tight knob, lowering that and using the Paragon overdrive bass control to tame it. So you've actually got way more scope and feel out of a high gain amplifier than if it was just the stock version. This video is probably going to be really long at this point because I've been talking for ages. So I just want to say thank you for checking this plugin out. I really hope you enjoy it. Links in the description box if you want to check it out. It's still 50% off on the Neural website right now until May the 1st, so I hope you get a chance to pick it up. But thank you for watching this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Like, subscribe, and share. I've been Rabea, and I will see you all very soon.